Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Recover Learning Hub, from engagement to collaboration, strategies for growth through faith-based initiatives. My name is Lara Balick. I'm one of the research coordinators on Recover's community engagement team. This is our moderator for today, Dr. Tony Miner. Our agenda for today is that we have Minister Heather Elizabeth Brown, who will be presenting first. Then we have Imam Sulaiman Hani, and we have a Q&A, and we have a wrap-up and conclusion.
All right, thank you. Welcome to each of you. So very happy to be on the call. And we're so very, very happy that you all are with us. Okay, so we have two presenters. Our first want to introduce Minister Heather Elizabeth Brown. She is a motivational speaker, preacher, author, ordained minister, and a COVID-19 survivor. She survived a serious COVID infection that led to 31 days on a ventilator and in a medically induced coma. Her story is just not about surviving COVID and recovery, as it says here, but also about her decision to be brave, courageous, and to choose joy and optimism every day. Now she works as a tireless advocate for lone COVID sufferers and as a champion for finding purpose, peace, and resilience in every circumstance. She lives in Detroit, Michigan, with her puppy, GGL, the brave Brown. And our second panelist is Imam Hani. He is the Director of Academic Affairs at El Mahir Institute and an international speaker on religion, philosophy, and society. He earned a master's degree with Harvard University and a master's from the University of Jordan, and currently resides in Michigan. So we will first begin with our presentation by Heather Elizabeth Brown.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It is wonderful to be here this evening with you all. Definitely thank Recover and this initiative for the opportunity to be before you here tonight. And thank you to our moderator, our panelists, and all of those who worked so hard to put this together. Again, my name is Heather Elizabeth Brown. I am from Detroit, Michigan, and I am a COVID survivor and a long COVID activist. I'm also a motivational speaker, a corporate trainer. I wear a lot of hats, but tonight I'm here because we are at the Faith Initiative and Engagement, right, Learning Hub, and we're talking about faith. And as somebody who walks in her calling in ministry, as somebody who I believe I have strong faith, especially with the past 2.5, 3 years, with what's been going on with COVID and everything that I went through, I really think that this is an important topic and discussion to have about the importance of engaging the faith-based community and how that can help as we continue to have discussions about COVID and long COVID. So, okay, so let's start with who am I? Well, again, I'm Heather Elizabeth Brown. I'm 37 years young. I'm a corporate trainer and a diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging consultant. Again, I'm an ordained minister, elder-elect, a former Detroit police chaplain, and a COVID-19 survivor and long COVID advocate. And I always represent Detroit. So, who I was before COVID. Before COVID, I was super active in ministry. I was singing on the praise team. I was preaching, as you see one of these pictures. I was working with the media ministry. I was serving as a chaplain with the Detroit Police Department. I was healthy. I was strong in my faith. I was super active. I was always moving and doing something. And I had something that I was doing every day. I went from work to something with church or, another activity, and just very active as a young person usually is. So why am I here? Well, I am here because I believe that my experience with COVID-19 put me at the intersection of faith and fear. I had to make a choice. When I first got COVID, it was April of 2020 during the first wave. I got very sick. I had taken 2 COVID tests and they came back negative, but I knew I was sick. I remember talking to my mother and saying that I was so afraid. They had sent me home from the hospital for a second time. And I remember telling my mom that I was afraid that if I went to sleep, that I was not going to wake up. So I went back to the hospital for a third time. At that time, they admitted me and they tested me for COVID. And at that time, I tested positive. When they did a X-ray, they also found that I had a pretty severe case of COVID-induced pneumonia in both of my lungs. And they put me on the highest level of oxygen, as you see in that far left picture, but it was still not improving. So about 48 hours, not even, after I was admitted to the hospital, the doctors told me that my lungs were failing and that the only thing that they could think to do to save my life was to put me into a medically induced coma and put me on a ventilator, which was absolutely terrifying. At that time, again, in the first wave, the only thing that the news was saying was that people were dying of COVID and that there were a lot of people going onto ventilators, but they weren't coming off. So I really had to take a moment and pray. I remember talking to my family, telling them that I love them very much. I prayed with my mom and my godmother and the pastor and first lady of my church. I had a lot of people praying for me. And I went onto the ventilator and I was in the coma for 31 days. I suffered a lot during that time. And after, I had a lot of complications. I had a stroke. I had blood clots. I had blood transfusions. I woke up and I couldn't walk. I couldn't even sit myself up in the bed. I couldn't talk. I was on a feeding tube. And I had to relearn how to walk and how to take care of myself. So those pictures in the middle, that top one is from inpatient rehab. I spent almost 2 months there. And the one on the right is from one of my many physical therapy sessions where I was getting back my strength and my coordination. So I am here because, again, at the intersection of faith and fear, I had to make a choice. I had to choose what my life was going to be. And I, more than that, had to choose whether I was going to continue to have faith in God, whether I was going to continue to have faith in myself and my ability to be resilient, and what the next part of my life was going to be like. Okay, so the interesting thing is there have been positive aspects of my situation as well. I've been able to do a lot of media and advocacy work because of my experience. I've been able to talk to people and spread at first information about how dangerous COVID really was. And now continuing to still talk about that, but also have discussions about long COVID, about legislation and the issues that people are dealing with now health-wise, financially, people with their careers and with work. So you see a couple logos from some of the appearances or interviews I've had, including the Today Show, CNN, Rolling Stone, our local newspapers, and some national and international platforms as well. And I share that to say that there is always an opportunity to continue to have discussions and to continue to advocate for people who are dealing with long COVID, and especially engaging the faith-based community is really important because there are some outlets, these are, more national news outlets, but I've also, done speeches and, done talks at churches and, at Women's Day events and things like that. And there is a lot of missed opportunity to engage the faith-based community and to really galvanize that group of people when it comes to COVID advocacy and long COVID. Okay, so in addition to those media appearances, I've also been able to do a lot of advocacy work. Since my initial illness, I found a very strong community, and I found a lot of opportunities to share my story, but really to become an advocate for COVID survivors, for people who are dealing with long COVID. I participated in the Solve ME CFS Advocacy Month, where we were able to discuss and promote legislation for long COVID. We met with our representatives, our state representatives, congressmen and women, and senators, and all sorts of people who make those kind of decisions. And we had discussions about the importance of passing the Long COVID Act and the bills that were in the House and the Senate, and talking about how long COVID is affecting people right now and how it will continue to affect a large portion of the population for years to come. I also have had the pleasure of participating in Recover, as I'm here right now, as a patient representative. And, I work with the Community Engagement Committee with Active 4C, which is a Duke University initiative when it comes to COVID on the Community Advisory Board. I've been in a Scripps wearable study. I've been in a Johns Hopkins study. I've been in a World Health Organization study and a couple others. So I mention that because, again, when you're engaging different communities and when you're talking to different people, sometimes it is the community that people are involved in or that people connect with that gives them the opportunity to participate in things that would really be helpful to them. A lot of these opportunities I would not know about. I would not have been able to participate in a study or be able to be a patient advisor if it wasn't for the long COVID and COVID survivor communities that I was a part of. So I want to talk a little bit about faith in action. So these are 3 pictures since I've recovered that is representative of some of the work that I have done and continue to do in the community that has something to do with COVID or, faith-based initiatives. So first, you see a picture of me getting my COVID vaccine. We were in Detroit here, and I was very excited for that. And what myself and some other people in my community did was we actually took pictures or videotaped when we did it and kind of like posted it on social media with a couple tags, just encouraging other people to get the shot, to get vaccinated, and kind of talking about the importance and why we did it. And so I think that that's really important, especially for me as a representative of the faith community, as a minister, as an elder-elect, as somebody who preaches and teaches and talks about faith and God a lot, to kind of bridge that gap between faith and medicine and the understanding of how they work together and not separately. The middle picture is us doing some video. That's one of the young ladies from my church and my pastor. We did a Gas on God giveaway, which we are doing next month as well. So last year we did Gas on God and we gave away over $10,000 in gas. We had lines wrapped around 2 different gas stations, and that was an outreach activity for us. So we were able to minister to people, but also we were offering COVID vaccines at our church. So we said, hey, come get a free tank of gas and then go right over to the church and get vaccinated. So that is another way to engage. And over here on the right, you see me in my Avatar Halloween costume. And so we had a harvest festival with the Detroit Police Department with the 6th precinct. And again, we were offering COVID vaccines and COVID tests. We were offering COVID packets or, just packets of disinfectant, hand sanitizer, hand wipes, things like that. And then we also gave out candy to the kids. So again, continuing with talking about faith in action, my congregation has had COVID outreach and visibility throughout the pandemic. We have done multiple COVID supply giveaways. We've done grocery and gas giveaway. We've had multiple vaccine clinics. We have another one coming up this month. We've done outreach to our seniors specifically. So the senior citizens in our congregation, we have called them, checked on them, sent them groceries, made sure that they were taken care of and that they didn't need to leave the houses, taken them to get their vaccines, taken them for medical appointments. We instituted something that we've done in years before, but we really ramped it up in the past 2 years of the pandemic, which is outdoor services, to allow people to still engage in their usual communal worship activities, but in a space that is outdoors and a little bit safer and more socially distanced. And I think that that was important to not only continue and try to have continuity in our worship services, but also to underscore the importance of still socially distancing, of still wearing masks, of still being careful and being cautious in what we do. And we had code of protocols once we decided to start going back inside for service. So we have spaced out seating, we had cleanings and disinfecting the whole sanctuary before and after each service. Everyone was required to wear masks, and we had wristbands that were either red, yellow, or green. So red was don't even touch me. Yellow was, we can shake hands or fist bump. And green was I'm okay to hug. And so that was something that we instituted to, again, continue to underscore the importance of social distancing, but also give people the opportunity to re-engage with the community indoors in a space that and in a way that they felt most comfortable. And so again, that's another picture. So that is actually before the pandemic. I'm back there in the red, and that is the pastor and first lady of our church. So as you see, one of the things I used to do, and hopefully we'll get back to, was singing with our praise team. And so I think this picture is just representative of the joy that I have with serving and with being a part of the faith community and with being a leader, and also the positive influence that the faith community can have, especially when it comes to things like medical health initiatives and what we're talking about, which is COVID-19. After COVID, I'm still active in ministry. I am a long COVID advocate. I am healing and I'm healthy and I'm stronger in my faith. So these are some pictures that are representative of some of the best moments of my after COVID experience. You see my puppy Gigi in her pajamas. I'm very happy to have her. She's my emotional support animal, and I just love her to pieces. And I'm so grateful for her and what she does, especially with some of the things that I've been diagnosed with, like PTSD. She's very helpful, and she's just a wonderful little thing. At the bottom picture, you see my family, and I think my mom and dad are on here actually. So this is a family picture that I took when I was able to finally travel back home and visit my family after all the illness. This was right around Christmas, I believe, or Thanksgiving. I think it was Christmas. And it was just really a wonderful, wonderful moment to be back with my whole family, especially when I was worried that I might not have seen them again. So the top right, I got back into the performing arts ministry at my church. And so we did kind of like an illustrated sermon. And I was, as you can see, one of the, well, I don't want to call myself a devil, but that's the role that I played. And in the middle, this picture is especially important to me. This is myself and Dr. Anas Al-Jazem from Beaumont Hospital. And he is a physical medicine and rehabilitation doctor. He specializes in pain management. And this is actually the doctor, and I had a whole team. There are a lot of people that saved my life, but this is the doctor that I feel like at a very critical point was very influential in the reason that I survived everything that I did. And that's because they brought him in probably in the middle of my illness, and he worked really hard to adjust the medications that they had used to put me into the coma in order to wake me up and bring me out safely. And he's just been such a blessing. He now runs a long COVID clinic, and we still keep in contact. So I went to see him when I was able, and it was just a really, really special moment to be able to connect with one of the doctors who was so important in my survival in this experience. So after COVID, this is what my life looks like. But I think the thing that is most important for me to just say, as I'm coming close to the end of this presentation, is I'm still healing, but I am better than I was before. I'm getting healthier every day, and I feel better every day. I'm still active in ministry, and I'm stronger in my faith than I was even before this whole experience. And in the middle of the struggle, in the middle of the worst part of the storm, I didn't know how that was possible. However, having the necessity of depending on the Lord, really taking stock of where my faith lies and what I truly believe has been invaluable in strengthening my faith and strengthening my resolve and confirming for me why I believe what I believe and why I do what I do. So what I'd like to just share a little bit with those of you who are here is, how do you connect and engage the community about COVID? And so that is a question that you can ask yourself, but I also want to just give you a couple suggestions that I think will be very helpful, especially when you're working with the faith-based community. You can connect with the medical community as well. I think one of the things that's very important is to connect with people who are experts, to people who know, for lack of a better term, who know what they're talking about, right? Like, not people who are getting their information from a random YouTube video they find, but people who are getting their information from medical journals, people who are medical professionals who are working in the medical community and who can help you not just give out information, but give out the correct information. I think it's also important to seek out communities and organizations that deal with long COVID. There are different groups for COVID survivors. There are different organizations that are centering around different communities that are dealing with COVID. I believe that there is a African-American COVID survivors representative in here today. I think I saw her name. So organizations like that, Black COVID survivors, there are a lot of communities. You just have to be involved and search them out and use them as a connection point, especially when you're engaging the faith-based community. I think bringing in more resources, bringing in more people, bringing in more opportunities is invaluable when it comes to this step. And lastly, use your voice and influence to educate and dispel rumors. One thing that we see in a lot of the faith-based communities is we say sometimes that people are so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. And what that kind of means is sometimes people are so focused on one side of their identity or one thought pattern that they're not really thinking about the converse side or, something that logically aligns with it. So there are a lot of rumors or misinformations that need to be dispelled. There's a lot of education that still needs to happen around COVID, around long COVID, around the fact that it exists. There are people in our communities who are suffering from long COVID and are struggling, not just because of the physical or emotional ailments that they're dealing with, but also because there's nobody around them who really understands what they're going through, including their family and their friends and their employers. So being able to use your voice, being able to use your influence, being able to engage with people and help move the conversation forward in a positive way is a really important part of the work that we do. Lastly, if you'd like to continue to have this conversation or you have more questions after this, you can contact me. I am HE_the_brave on all social media, www.hethebrave.com, or you can email me at missheatherelizabeth@gmail.com. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank again Recover for this opportunity, but also for all the work that you are doing and continue to do when it comes to COVID and recovery. It is so important and so needed and so necessary. So I encourage you to continue to keep up the good fight, and thank you for this opportunity. And that's it.
All right, thank you. Before we move on to the next speaker, and thank you for your presentation, I just want to ask you one question. We're going to have a full Q&A, but can you just suggest three things? Can you tell us three things that's important when we are engaging the faith community? Most of the people that are on, their whole goal is to increase the involvement of the community, more participants, et cetera. And one of the things that they are most concerned about is that how do we include the faith community, how we go through the faith community. Can you just tell us three things just from your heart that are very important as we think about partnering with the faith community?
Okay. I think the first thing is approaching with a sense of authenticity, being really open and honest about your goals, about your hopes for the interaction, about what you can bring and what you hope to achieve, and just being real. I think that a lot of times people, I don't want to say misuse the faith community, but don't really know the best way to engage and don't really know how to make it something that is pretty much a tangible net benefit for everyone. And so I think that first of all, just being really open and honest and being authentic about what you want to do and what you want to achieve and how you think that they can help is a great first step. I think everyone appreciates realness and appreciates honesty. The second thing I would say is use plain language. There are people who you will say some things and in a conversation that you may have with another person in the scientific community or the medical community, it flows very easily. But for someone who is a layman who doesn't know most of these terms, a lot of things just go over their heads. They go over my head, and I'm, part of a lot of these conversations. And so I think using not dumbed down language, but plain language and being very intentional in what you say and how you explain it is really important. And the third thing I would say is be sensitive. to the faith community that you are participating in. Different congregations, different faiths have different beliefs, have different opinions or approaches when it comes to certain things, when it comes to health, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to interaction. And you have to do research and know enough about the community that you're approaching, lest you unintentionally offend or unintentionally do something that is not aligned with their beliefs. And so I think that's really important. I think that goes back to authenticity, because if you're really authentic and you're really honest and you genuinely want to engage with the community, you're going to do what you need to do the research or to have conversations with the individuals in that community in order to know how to best approach the conversation and how you can best help. And it's not just about what they can do for you. You also want to bring something about what you can do for them. Why is this a benefit to the people in this community? Why is it that you want to help? What is it that that you're doing? So I think those would be my three things.
All right, wonderful. And now we turn it over to Iman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And for that one person in Hawaii, good morning. Honestly, I could have just continued listening to you, Minister Heather. Like your personal story and the work that you're doing is really priceless. And that's understating how important this work is for all communities, and not just here in Detroit, where I actually did not know we were neighbors. And I'm glad to hear that. My name is Sulaiman, which is the Semitic or Arabic form of Solomon, a name that is perhaps familiar to everyone here. And I am a speaker, a student of knowledge, a teacher. I just work with so many different people in so many different ways. I enjoy traveling internationally and nationally and meeting people of different backgrounds and cultures and understandings for the sake of connections, for the sake of improvement, for the sake of growth. And while I'm based here in Dearborn, where we have, I believe, in Southeast Michigan, some of the best food in the country, we also have, unfortunately, some of the worst winters compared to maybe the southern states. I still don't know why I live in the cold. Anyways, long story short, I am very grateful for the opportunity here, really grateful for what Recover COVID is doing. And I thank everyone who's facilitating these types of programs across the country and around the globe. Going back to 2020, and I honestly find it bizarre that we are still referencing COVID-19 in 2022. We knew perhaps early on in 2020, as many experts started talking about the pandemic potentially taking longer than we expected, and the virus perhaps lasting in different forms and variants longer than we were expecting. But it's just really interesting to think about year 2020 in terms of what happened. People were affected globally, as we all know, in many different ways, and communities of different backgrounds were affected in different ways. We all know that anyone who came from or any specific region in which there was a lower socioeconomic background was hit really hard. And as Muslims, we have obviously, diversity in terms of background, a lot of diversity, which I'll mention in a moment. But the reason I mention this is because religiously, within the Muslim community, we have pretty much 24/7 connection to the mosque, in the sense that we really don't have like one particular sermon or activity. We do have a Friday sermon, but we have 5 prayers. And you can imagine, from morning to night, these 5 prayers, there are congregations that are always coming in. And in between, there are programs, social functions, there are food drives, there are educational programs with different city, state police as well. Actually, we had one earlier this year with Detroit police, which was wonderful. So a lot of different programming. You can imagine that with 5 daily prayers and constantly being in the mosque, when the lockdown took place in 2020, it wasn't just here, all around the country. It hit the community really hard from a psychological, spiritual perspective, because as the lockdown took place in April, as we all recall, and people were in a state of perhaps fear, wondering how long is this going to last? What's going to happen? What's next? People were rushing to kind of hoard supplies for themselves. We saw community centers of different faith backgrounds, mosques, and yes, churches and synagogues and others and many even secular organizations, stepping up to the plate and doing just a number of different things to serve the communities, to remove that fear. People shifted over to the virtual space. And I personally, I love that. I think that's one of the greatest blessings and silver linings of the hardship of the pandemic, which is being able to connect and really pushed forth a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations, the infrastructure. The fact that we can even connect for this program today is maybe a silver lining of the pandemic itself. The fact that many people tuned in to listen to something that would uplift them in a time of hardship, or would uplift them when they were in the hospital beds and nobody could visit from their family and their friends, and they felt alone, or they had no family and friends, and they had to, FaceTime people they didn't know, because people in the mosques and many other places as well were volunteering to just tune in and talk to someone who was struggling and was isolated. So there are many, silver linings, and it was a blessing to see people step up. It was a huge blessing to see the faith-based initiatives, the organizations, the houses of worship step up to the plate and really serve in a time of need. And that's really what I believe personally as a Muslim. That's what faith is about in some ways. To serve others in times of need is one aspect of faith. In addition to this, of course, in our mosques, the restrictions, as they started to ease and the lockdown was lifted for the mosques specifically, you can imagine the just immense amount of concern people had coming to the mosque. Prayer rugs, everyone bringing their own. Everyone's wearing masks, sanitizers everywhere. People are praying with distance between them, which is not the norm for us. And slowly, as the mosques started to open up in 2020, and we, were attending different funerals and thinking about all the loved community members and relatives, my own grandmother amongst them, a local imam amongst them, and many others who had passed away during the pandemic, may God have mercy on them. As people started coming out, now we were hearing that some people had not yet recovered. And so with the first maybe impression of, what we now know to be as long COVID, there were many people who were not coming to the mosques, could not connect to the community, or were coming with a sense of fear and concern. And so we started trying to figure out, how do we motivate? How do we help? How do we assist? How do we support? How do we make sure there's a space for everyone in this community center? Because at the end of the day, it's not just a house of worship. It really is a community center for all people in the locality, and not even, again, not just for Muslims or a specific background of people. It was open for everyone. And while most, and many, I should say, Muslim Americans are educated and financially capable of seeking out resources for healthcare, there are many who, they don't have access to healthcare. And there are still many people today who are struggling because of that, or they come from perhaps a low economic background, so they're struggling to find some kind of help. The worldview here for us as Muslims helped us to continue moving forward. And in fact, it is in times like this that faith in God and faith in a higher power supports an individual and supports a community. It is in times like this that our belief in, a divine, timeless revelation causes people to step up to the plate and ask not just how many sanitizers can I get for myself, or how can I protect my family, how can I buy all the groceries I need? No, but rather, how do I take care of everyone else in the community? How do we support all of those who are struggling? And so within our community, next slide, please. Within our community, there is actually a diversity that a lot of people are unaware of. Most of, obviously my interaction, my teaching, workshops, seminars is within the faith-based community. Yes, primarily the Muslim community, but also oftentimes multi-faith and interfaith coalitions, oftentimes universities and other programs. And what I hear often is a misconception about what a Muslim looks like. Who is a Muslim today? And while it may be easier to identify some Muslim women because of, let's say, the headscarf, oftentimes Muslims are, kind of put into certain kind of categories or stereotyped, as is the case for other groups. And the reason I'm mentioning this is for those who work with others, you are likely already aware of this, but it's simply a reminder. According to this particular study, ISPU in 2019 and 2017, and before it several times, they've done this. Muslim Americans are in fact ethnically the most diverse religious group. I remember one time there was like a protest and a counter protest at a mosque. They were trying to basically intimidate the Muslim community in Arizona. And one man came out and he was kind of getting angry at the protesters. They came with guns. And he basically said, like, can you just leave us alone? And he's like, go back to your country. He's like, I'm from here. He's like, I'm from here. He's like, what do you mean you're from here? Where are your parents from? He's like, I'm from here. I converted to Islam. And the man was shocked. He's like, come inside and let's talk, because you clearly don't know what a Muslim looks like. He went inside, he had pizza, even though they were counter protesting. And he had a shirt that said something really profane, like F Islam. And he, after being inside for, a good hour or so, he came outside and he was interviewed, and he had flipped his shirt. He's like, I'm never gonna do something like that again. I don't need to be convinced of what Muslims believe, but I need to understand that we need to kind of support one another, live side by side in peace. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it's a very small example, one incident amongst many, as perhaps everyone here is aware, that there are many misconceptions people have about other groups, and American Muslims tend to be amongst those who are misunderstood. We have a significant diversity. You look at just the one example here, 28%, and this has changed a lot, 28% Black, 20% white, 23% Asian or East Asian, 8% Hispanic, 2% Native, 5% other. It's just constantly changing. We do have, I'm telling you very frankly, one of the most diverse communities ethnically, to the extent that when I'm giving, a Friday lecture, Friday sermon in some of the major cities, like here in Southeast Michigan and other cities, we probably have 30, 40 different ethnicities represented in that one congregation. And so the reason I'm sharing this is for those who work with others, and you're doing just really important, priceless work, remarkable work, and we thank you for everything that you do. Do note that Muslims do hail from many different places, speak many different languages. And in fact, the minority of Muslims speak Arabic, less than 15%. And a very small percent are what's called, a brown Muslim from South Asia, as they identify themselves. So I'm just letting you know, we are very, very diverse, and a significant part of the Muslim American community is actually on the younger side as well. A lot of young Muslims in terms of the demographic. Work-wise and background-wise, just completely diverse. You can have some who are coming from a very difficult background economically, and others who are highly, highly educated. In fact, according to one study, above average in terms of the education in the country. And American Muslims tend to oftentimes emphasize to their children, this is what we keep hearing every time a youngster comes up and says, my parents are pressuring me to get into medicine. My parents want me to be a doctor. It's the case for many people. We usually laugh. We're like, man, we have enough doctors in the community, to the extent that, according to what one recent study, is like 10% or 7% of physicians in the US are Muslims. So we have a lot of doctors. And ironically, some people who don't like Muslims tend to come to Muslim doctors for help when they need it. Oftentimes this is the case. And that's the time that their stereotype perhaps is removed. For us, as Minister Heather mentioned as well, similar to Christianity and other religions, health and medicine is extremely important in Islam. We have a really deep, rich tradition when it comes to the Islamic approach, the religious, faith-based approach to medicine, in the sense that we don't, as Muslims, separate between the worldly, like the secular, and the religious. For us, Islam is a way of life. Worshipping God really includes everything, including taking care of one's body, the things that you eat, the things we consume, the things we watch. So there's a spiritual, psychological, physical component. And the reason I'm sharing this is because we've had, in the classical books that were written by scholars, just an overabundance of literature on medicine in Islam. And in fact, in the year 1000 to 1250 approximately, a lot of the different sciences and inventions and advancements in medicine were at the hands of polymaths and Muslim scholars. It's very important to us. Why am I sharing this? It's because oftentimes, again, we may think about people a certain way. For us, what's driven many of our community members to seek help, whether it's with COVID or anything else, was in fact a religious obligation to take care of your body, a religious obligation. Go to your doctor. The same way you're seeking spiritual fulfillment and a prescription for your soul and your heart by reading the Quran or coming to the mosque for prayer, or calling upon God wherever you are required to take care of your body. Why am I mentioning this? We've had instances before where, due to ignorance or lack of maybe religious understanding, that a person would think, well, I trust in God, I don't need to go seek help. That's a misunderstanding. And I don't think that represents Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, because for all of us, we believe in terms of jurisprudence and theology and trusting God, that trusting God goes hand in hand with you putting in your effort, your absolute best effort. So we have this concept of tawakkul, which means to trust in God. And that while it makes you optimistic and hopeful, we are required to seek out solutions. We trust in God that everything that we go through happens for a reason. There's a wisdom behind it. There's a reward for the patient, but you are also required to put in your effort, to seek out help from, your doctor, physician, someone who knows. Go to the people of knowledge. It's really important for us as well to emphasize knowledge here and expertise, that we are not allowed to appeal to an authority that is biased or is based on rumors or hearsay. We are required to go to people of understanding. In fact, it is a revelatory command. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you yourself do not know. So this is why anytime there were rumors, and always within every community, there are people who are, skeptical, they distrust, sometimes for understandable reasons, other times for frivolous ones, we still emphasize to them, if you yourself are not qualified and you're listening to people who are unqualified, you're probably going to get to a conclusion that is not valid. Go to people of expertise, because the fear and the skepticism that took place in the beginning of the pandemic, and maybe still now to some extent, was the type that literally cost some people their lives, was the type that caused some people to end up in hospitals, was the type to make people complacent until they themselves or their families were sick. And so we encourage people from a religious perspective, please talk to trustworthy physicians, experts, people who are actually understand what's happening with virology or anything else. Chronic illnesses from the Islamic perspective are, we consider anything that happens to us a test, but we do not seek hardship in this life. We seek to be cured. We seek to be healed. We seek to prevent harm for ourselves and for society. And of course, the faith-based perspective here is not only are we seeking help, and we encourage our community to do so, we cannot think from an individualistic perspective. So one of the main maxims within Islam that generally should be known is it's a very community-based or collectivist type of religion, where you are not allowed to prioritize yourself at the expense of society. In fact, the revelation itself, we believe, is to preserve society, even if one or two individuals may not like it, or they may find that they are not affected by a law or a command. Well, it's not only for your sake. We believe that divine commands are to preserve the well-being of all people. And so for one person to say, I'm healthy, I'm okay, I don't mind, I don't need a mask. Well, there are many other people who are going to be impacted by that decision, especially if you multiply this and you factor in other people who are thinking the same way. And that's precisely what happened. We've lost many community members because of that. I still, to this day, maybe I'm on the far end of things. I still, when I travel, I do wear a mask, and I'm still very cautious. I have some family members who are considered at risk. And even then, it's not just because of my family. I interact a lot with other people. And while I understand that things have changed in the last 3 years, COVID is still around and people are still getting sick. And I believe from a faith-based perspective, as well as generally just in terms of what's happening medically and following the trends, that we still need to educate our communities and teach our communities how important it is to think about the collective well-being, not just ourselves. And oftentimes that's what's missing when certain things are politicized for different reasons. And
1 minute, sir. Excuse me.
Thank you. I want to answer a really important question, which is, how do you connect with the local Muslim community? This is a common question that's asked. First, for those who do work in different sites and different places, reach out to mosques, because they are usually extremely welcoming, really welcoming to interact, to work with you, to have workshops, seminars, advertisements, whatever it may be. Second, reach out to community leaders in the Muslim region that you're in, whether it's an imam or other community leaders. And the third is to reach out to Muslims in the health field. And again, there are a great number of them, because they themselves could reach out to the community. And these are just 3 of many other ways. I do encourage those who work directly with Muslim patients to remember that patient consent is very important. Sometimes there are gender interaction guidelines that we have as Muslims that should be considered. It's not a major issue. It's not a deal breaker. It's just something to keep in mind when it comes to oftentimes the preference of female patients having a preference for a female doctor, or physician, or nurse. But again, there are exceptions in medical situations. My conclusion after all of this is to say that we have come a long way, and we've all had friends, family, and others who not only got sick, but perhaps also passed away, returned back to the Creator. And while there's still a pandemic, it is time for us to increase the amount of work that we're putting forth to exemplify good practices that will help people, not just with this particular pandemic, but in general, just across society. And to continue supporting those, of course, who have long COVID symptoms with services that are tailored to them. recommendations, referrals to programs like Recover COVID. And while we believe that everything has its wisdoms and happens for a reason, what we are required to do is to respond, look for solutions, look for a way to continue moving forward. So I appreciate the great works and efforts of Recover COVID and everyone who's facilitated the works of Recover COVID and similar initiatives all around the world, the people who are unknown behind the scenes. Keep up the great work and let's keep moving forward. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next slide, and we have Q&A now. I'm gonna go back to the Iman just very, very briefly. Are there spiritual or ritual issues in approaching the Muslim community that are sensitive in nature that we ought to be aware of as we are approaching, like when we collaborate with our Jewish community and particularly with the Orthodox communities? There are some things we need to be aware of as we approach them. Could you just very briefly, can you think of at least one or two things that may be helpful as we approach Muslim communities?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I appreciate that. Generally speaking, there's nothing major to keep in mind. Just like any other community, aside from the one point that I mentioned, which is if there's someone directly interacting with a patient, usually there's a preference for a healthcare worker of the same gender. Usually that's the case,
Okay.
but not always. And the second is is generally speaking when we have programs at the mosque, because we have had vaccines, we've had many other drives, we've had workshops with similar organizations, just to consider that the crowd is diverse, but there's nothing else that needs to be kept in mind.
All right, thank you. So I'm gonna engage the two of you directly, particularly with key steps that people can take, because we really want our participants to walk away with some things that they can remember. So one of the questions particularly is, what are the best practices and the best steps, things that people should think about? Like, for example, a lot of people do not know one of the best ways to engage the faith community is to go directly to the clergy. People are not aware that there are clergy associations where you can go to a clergy grouping and you can do a presentation to 10, 15, 20 clergy at one time. And that's a good way. One of the other things that I say to people, it's important to research the congregations in your area, to try to find out what congregations are already doing health ministry. So if you know ahead of time, then you can approach that congregation. And then thirdly, I think it's important to build a rapport with the faith leader. Do a one-on-one before you have an ask. Do a one-on-one, and as you do the one-on-one, kind of make sure that we couch it in a sense of mission, service, as been said. Also recognizing that you fully understand all of the health disparities, and all the barriers that people face. And, it's important, to know that when you talk about clusters of churches, like if it's in Detroit, there could be a pastoral alliance. There are statewide alliances. If you go to the Lutherans, for example, there is a body among Presbyterians, Lutherans, and you can go contact a bishop, contact the office, and make a request. All right. So when you think about those practical things, Heather, what are some other things about the faith community that people may not know that can make the engagement easier?
That is a good question. I think that you hit on a lot of the major things that are really important for best practices. I definitely agree that engaging the local congregations is probably the quickest and simplest way to start the conversation. just researching the large and small congregations that are around maybe your organization or in a certain area, and then reaching out to them of all faiths. And I think a lot of people don't really understand or aren't really sure how to connect with the faith community sometimes. And most of the time, all you need to do is call, right? Call the church office, right? Call, you can, call the mosque, you can call, our church office, and you can, establish that connection. And most leaders, I think I would say all leaders are definitely accessible and want to talk and want to have conversations. And as shepherds of their flocks, they want to do whatever they can in order to do the best for the people in their faith community. And so I think that's really important. I think another thing that is really important, that is a really good best practice, is maybe connecting initially with people that you may know, or asking people and using that type of network in order to make connections and to bridge gaps. A lot of times, if you just ask somebody like, hey, do you know any pastors in the city? Or like, do you know somebody? Someone's like, oh yeah, like I know somebody, or this is my, church community, or, oh, like, yeah, I know this person. They go to, this, or they go to this, and like, I can put you in contact, my sister's brother's cousin, something like that. And so sometimes that's all it takes to establish that connection and to start the conversation. And so I think that that's probably one of the ones that I would say.
That's good. So I want to ask the imam this, within a lot of Christian churches, when you approach the pastor, you are possibly allowed to drop off flyers. You can stop by the church. They may allow you to come and make an announcement right in service. That's not uncommon. You can ask if you could come during the announcement period. They will allow someone to come and make an announcement. You can set a table up so when people are coming out. A lot of churches have feeding programs. Sometimes it's not simply the people in the house of worship, but very often the programs that they have at the church, if it's a feeding program or whatever. Now, within at a mosque, is it uncommon where they will allow an outside guest to come? What are the best practices, or what's the ask in approaching a mosque as to how you get inside the mosque and how you get to interact with the participants?
Thank you. Great question. Honestly, it's so straightforward. Pretty much every Islamic center that has anyone working in the office or somebody who's active there, they're always receptive to, the many questions that come in, requests to put up tables, flyers, announcements. It's the same as the churches, to be honest with you. We have programs for the community and sometimes for other organizations. We have tables, we have flyers. The first step would be just to reach out to the Islamic Center and see if basically what needs to be done, and they'll take care of the rest. It's really straightforward.
Okay. Now, are there in a local community, are there associations where imams gather, where a presentation could be made to not just one imam, but to a cohort?
Yes, absolutely. We have, and I can share the information here. I'll leave my info as I finish. We have an Imams Council of Michigan, and it includes some of the other Midwest cities. And we have a large number of imams in the group and some community leaders. And we have presentations from other organizations frequently. So I'd be happy to facilitate that for anything that needs to be facilitated.
Right. And so for all the participants, that's the same with all faiths. Like if it's there's often in your community, there's possibly a board of rabbis. That's a good opportunity to do a presentation. Like I mentioned with the Presbyterians, there's possibly a Baptist conference of pastors. So I think it's you get an opportunity to really interact. I have about 4 or 5 other questions, but I'm gonna ask one of our partners who's very active in NCAG to share her question. Teresa?
Hi, Tony. Thank you. there are a couple of assumptions about approaching churches, especially when we look at medium and larger size churches. Number one is that you are already being bombarded by health organizations and who are pushing, for church involvement with vaccination drives. And also that churches will require, more than just the service and PSA, from you, but that they're looking for donations and quote, love offerings as a benefit to them. I want to know if you can speak to that. And also with the vaccination drives, is there typically information also distributed at the vaccination drives when they're hosted by the churches? And just what are your thoughts and input about the donations as a requirement to come in?
Heather, you've had experience there.
Yeah, so I can, I guess I'll jump in. So I think that there are a couple things to consider in that, and I think that's a great question. I think that my experience has maybe been, depending on the size of the church, you may find, or whatever the faith community is, you may find that there is a nonprofit attached to the church, like a 501c3. And so sometimes they would rather go through the attached nonprofit for certain things versus go through the business office of the church, if that makes sense. I haven't personally heard of love offerings, but I don't doubt that. I know that sometimes that happens more like for people who are visiting preachers or evangelists. But I think that making a personal connection or having that personal type of buy-in or leeway is probably one of the greatest ways to kind of circumvent that. So, for example, having somebody make an introduction, right? Or going to these organizations and meeting a lot of different pastors or imams or rabbis at once. I think sometimes that helps because sometimes it's more of a word of mouth, especially in faith-based communities and larger ones. Like all of my churches, I would say mid-sized, growing large. And so my pastor is close with pastors of smaller congregations, but also knows and is close with pastors of what we would call like some of the Detroit mega churches. And so sometimes all it takes is a phone call to a friend like, hey, I just heard about, this COVID vaccine clinic. We're going to do it next Sunday. You should get in on it. And that's all it takes to open up a door and give a really great opportunity for you to do that work.
And that's a very good point. Teresa, do you have a follow-up to that?
I don't.
Okay.
I did just want to say, Heather Elizabeth, that your testimony was really encouraging. And I actually got some tips from what you said your church did.
Awesome. Thank you.
Now,
there's always a way. And I just want to sidebar. I'm sorry, Dr. Miner. I just want to sidebar and say one thing that I didn't mention earlier, but I think it's really important in what we've done with the last 2 or 3 years, social media. Connecting via social media and getting out there. And sometimes you can connect with a church quicker by going to their Instagram page, right? Or engaging on their Facebook page. Then you can get a call through depending on when the office is open or, how they're taking phone calls or messages. So, yeah.
Right. That's very good. That's very, very helpful. The research is so very, very important. I want to go back to the imam. One of the things I wanted to say is by way of a strategy, and I think Heather mentioned it, is that in most congregations, the final decision does rest with the faith leader, if it's the imam, if it's the pastor, the rabbi, right? One of the strategies could also be, and Heather mentioned it, is finding a lay person within the church to be the champion, right? Now, in dealing with, and I'm asking these questions, Imam, and because all of our faiths in some ways, and I liked how you talked about that Muslim community, the Muslim faith is really no different than all of them, that they kind of operate the same. But is that also a good strategy? Is it good to find a lay person within the congregation to be the champion, to sort of introduce, to be the ambassador minister to the imam. Is that particularly good as well?
That's a really good question. On this note, I think there may be a distinction in the sense that for many Islamic centers, the model that they have, in fact, for something like this, would not go to the imam, but would go to the board, would go to the executive director, would go to the person who's running the operations and say, yeah, this is a good event for us to have, unless it was something in which there was a religious concern or a religious matter that needed the imam's kind of consultation. But the imam doesn't have, for many Islamic centers, doesn't have really a say or really input on all the operations, introductions, announcements, all this type of thing. His role kind of is cut off from that because there's usually an executive director running the operations of the Islamic center.
Wonderful.
But that strategy would work
Yes, good.
for both the imam or the board. Yeah.
Now, I want to turn the discussion down another path for the two of you, and in the area of research generally. Right now, we do know, Heather, that within the African American community and a lot of communities of color, when you approach them to engage in a research project, there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of hesitation there. Okay. So I'm going to start with you, Iman. Then Heather, I want you to come behind. How do we couch this? We know this is an observational study, right? So, Iman, are there particular histories in the Islamic community? And once again, it's varied, of course. But is the term research, is it something that causes people to step back? What's the best way to approach it? Because this is just not a service project. This is research. Are there histories that we should be aware of?
That's a great
Challenges?
question. Yeah. I appreciate you asking this. Because of the ethnic diversity and racial diversity of the Muslim community, it would be hard to answer that with a general response. It may be that, as you saw in one of the studies, 28% of the American Muslim community is Black. And so I actually, in fact, the mosques in which I give most of my sermons and most of my programs, I've like heard, a perspective in which the harm from the past or the present really is not something that's easily forgotten. And it could impact, for many people, their general trust of research, their general trust of what's seen as one body, one community of science, which really is not one authority. It could be skepticism towards government or anything the government, kind of motivates people towards or invites people towards. And that was seen during the pandemic and is still the case today. So it's hard for me to answer that because our community is diverse. However, I would say that due to the increasing, education from a religious perspective, we've been kind of imams in different communities, speakers, activists, and others have been trying to motivate our community to consider research more, to consider getting involved more. And we have been generally seeing really, really good appeal and a connection to those who have reached out directly to our communities.
Okay. Heather, do you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. So I definitely agree. I think that in the African American community in particular, but I think most Black and Brown communities in the United States, there is a history of distrust when it comes to medicine, tests, and authority. And I think that that goes back to some of the points I made earlier about being educated, understanding the community, and also connecting with medical leaders and health, leaders in order to dispel rumors. So, for example, in the African American community, majority of people, if you talk to them about their distrust of medicine, one of the first things they're going to bring up is the Tuskegee experiments, right? However, what they fail to mention, or what some people don't understand, is the actual details of the experiments, and that people were not deliberately infected with syphilis. They already had it and were not given treatment. right? So sometimes people say, well, I'm not going to get the vaccine because of what they did with Tuskegee. And it's not, it's not the exact same correlation, even though the understanding of mistrust of medicine is still there. So I think, first of all, being educated about the histories of the communities that you're going into and what their distrust might be is the first step in order to kind of combating that and in order to kind of make, do some work when it comes to that. I think that also one thing that's really important is that when we're doing this work and when we're having these conversations, that we're very sensitive and understanding about the strong emotions, right, and connotations that can come up. I would recommend that everyone, if you're interested, especially in this section, read a book called Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, I believe. It is an amazing work about the inequality in medicine and medical abuse that has happened in the United States to communities of color. And what you will see is this type of thing has happened all the way up until the 2000s, right? So it's not like it's so very far removed from some people's history. There are some people who are alive today who are still in their, maybe 40s or 50s who were affected by unequal or abusive medical practices. So I think that, again, doing your research, being educated on the community that you're going into, understanding, I think it was interesting what the imam said, the Muslim community is very diverse. So if you're going to a certain congregation, you may need to do more research about that congregation, that group of, members of the community and what their specific experiences are. And what you're doing for a group in New York may not work for a group in Dearborn. What you're doing for a group in California may not work for a group in Texas. But understanding the dynamics of that community is the most essential part.
Wow, what a way to end. Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you, Iman. Those were wonderful presentations. Why don't we all give them a hand? Give them a hand. Thank you so much. It was our hope that you would receive some tips and some strategies, some ideas, some new approaches for engaging the faith community. We all know how important recovery is. This is very important. Your work is very important. And we hope that we have aided you in the process of enhancing your work. So we just want to say thank you. Please stay in touch. You can see on the screen ways in which you can. If you look in the chat, there's a link there where you can give feedback. There is no question I'm going to recommend that we do a repeat on this. I believe we received some very good pointers, some very good ideas, some things that we could consider. There's a host of other faiths that could have been included. But I believe that what you received today is our salient ideas that kind of cut across. So once again, we thank you for attending. We thank Heather and Iman for such wonderful presentations. And I know that we are all enhanced because of your work, your presentation. And once again, it is our goal is to recruit as many people as we can so that we can better understand long COVID, but we can't do it without participants. Thank you. Have a very good evening, and we wish you well.